eyes. I heard your voice. The distance caught me by surprise again. And I know you claim you're all right. So fix your eyes on me. I guess I'm all you have, and I swear you see the dawn again. And I know I had it all on the line, just so seeing that folded hands and become blind. 'Cause even when there is no star in sight, you always be my only guiding light. Relate to my youth, I'm still in awe of you. Discovers a real truth I've always wrapped around you. Don't just slip away in the night. Don't just hurl your words from on high. 'Cause I know I had it all on the line. Don't just sit with folded hands and become blind. 'Cause even when there is no star in sight, will always be my only guiding light. If we come back and we're broken, unworthy and ashamed, I need something to believe in. You know you go your way.
Well, that's a great way to start our service. Welcome to Kensington, everyone, and certainly welcome to all of you who are watching on stream. How's everybody doing today? Good. Oh, that's an energetic crowd. That's awesome. Well, today we are in our third week of this series called 5 Surprising Things That God Loves. And today we are talking about the idea and the practice of leisure. Andrew Kim, our teaching pastor, is here today giving the message. I'm excited about all that he has to share and where God is taking this day. But before we move on with the rest of our day, there are a few opportunities that I want to let you all know about. It is amazing and just crazy to me to think about that we are less than 2 weeks away from Thanksgiving. It's like, where did the time go? Where did this year go? We're already up on the holidays. But this year during Thanksgiving, the first thing that I want to tell you all about is a tradition that we've done here at Kensington for a while called Thanksgiving baskets. So next Saturday, we will be meeting at Harrington Elementary School in Pontiac, assembling baskets. These baskets will be comprised of all the things and all the ingredients you need to make your very own Thanksgiving dinner. These baskets will go out and be delivered to families who otherwise may not have the means to provide a Thanksgiving meal. So there are 4 different ways we could jump in and be involved with this. The first way that we could jump in is we could sign up and we can go to Harrington Elementary and help pack these baskets. The second way is each basket costs about $50 in order to fill these baskets and deliver them. You could give the $50 and be a part of that way. And the third option is you could sign up to deliver these baskets to the homes of these families. And then the last and fourth option that you have to get involved is you could do all 3 of those things. Right? That's awesome. So this is really just a great opportunity that we have been afforded to jump in and be the hands and feet of Jesus and just provide love and a smile and food to families that are in need over the holidays. So in speaking about Thanksgiving, Andrew Kim told us last week that international students, 70% of international students never make it into an American home. We partner with a nonprofit organization through Oakland University called International Oasis. And what they do is they work with the international student community there as well as the greater student body there as well. And so they have a program which allows us, and they've invited us to be a part of it, to open up our homes to an international student on Thanksgiving. So this is something my wife and I are considering doing as well, because not only will they get to experience a piece of American tradition and culture through such a big holiday like Thanksgiving, but we also get the opportunity to engage and learn and get a taste of their culture as well. So if you feel the tug of God leaning on your heart to step into that and then also open up your home, it's a great opportunity. If you want more information on that, you can go out to the table that International Oasis has in the lobby and find out more information about that. Also, something that's going on right now as we speak is there are over 300 4th and 5th graders up at Spring Hill camps this weekend, and we are hearing that they are having a blast and having a great time. Lives are being changed up there. So we as a community can be praying for and thinking about all of our students that are up there. And a week from today, actually a week from this weekend, 1829 will be up at Spring Hill for the Rise Retreat. And so that's where our young adults pastor, Drew Daniels, will be taking a group of 1829ers up there to Spring Hill to enjoy just a weekend of just community and spending time in worship and stuff like that. So if you know of anyone between the ages of 18 and 29, or if you yourself are and you're interested in that, you can stop at the 1829 table right out there in the lobby as well. Well, in a minute, we're going to see a video. Today is Veterans Day. Give it up for all of our veterans. So in a minute, we're going to see a video that honors our veterans. But before we do that, I'm going to invite you all to stand up and greet someone next to you.
My name's Laura Rios. I was in the Air Force for 26 years on active duty.
My name's Chris Smith. I was in the United States Marine Corps from 2003 to 2013. Deployed to Iraq 2009 to 2010.
Name is George Everett Jr. I served in Vietnam with the 101st Airborne Division from 1969 to 70.
My name is Gerald Grzwinski. I served in Afghanistan from 2011 to 2012. I'm in the U.S. Army Reserve, and I'm a military police officer. I always had a strong family, so my sacrifice is losing that strong bond with my family because they were halfway around the world. It's like when you have to go to work and you know that your child's sick. You want to be there to take care of them, but you can't because you have something to go do. It's like that, but on a way grander scale.
A good example is when the Gulf War initially happened in August of 1990. I was pregnant. I was due to have a baby. And I knew as soon as I had that baby, whether it was a boy or girl, I was deploying 6 weeks later. That's sacrifice.
Valor is when everything's shredded away. How do you respond in that moment?
When you give up yourself. In a moment's notice, in a split second, you have to make a decision, and you might have to sacrifice yourself to save all your troops or everybody in your unit.
My father said to me, "You got some boxes here." And I said, "Boxes?" I said, "Well, open it up, Dad." He looked at me and he says, "You got a Bronze Star." He says, "Oh," and it says "for valor." And I says, "I just did a job, Dad. I protected my men."
When we speak of veterans, we're giving something of ourselves for the greater good. So the greater good for me would be for our country to have freedom.
When people disagree, or the nastiness of the politics, or seeing certain things, I may not agree with a lot of the stuff people do or how they go about it, but there's something genuine. And guess what? I'm protecting our way of life, that we can have this debate, we can have this conversation. You may not have to like it and everything, but that is the God-given right that we have fought for and want to protect.
Without our military and our veterans, who knows where we would be? I think we should remember them because they gave up everything to go over wherever they went and fight, to do the right thing, to come home to their families so their families could be free and their friends and everything else.
Once we do the Veterans Day, it is what happens afterwards. Is it just a momentary warm fuzzy that we just kind of, there you go, we wave the little flag and keep cruising?
Our country cannot just raise a flag, wave it a few times and says, "Well, that's it." Every person should say to themselves, if I was asked to serve, would I step forward?
Because without your support, it's hard for us to do our service and what we are happy to do. Support us, and that goes a whole long way.
On this day, let us solemnly remember
The sacrifices of all those who have fought
on the seas,
In the air,
and on foreign shores.
to preserve our heritage of freedom
let us reconsecrate ourselves
to the task of promoting
and enduring peace
so that their efforts
so that our efforts
shall not have been in vain.
In 17 minutes, it will be the 100th anniversary of when World War I ended. Because World War I ended at 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the 11th month in 2018. And World War I was known as the war to end all wars because 16 million people died. And there were also 37 million civilian as well as military casualties. It was a it had a huge impact in our world and in our history. And since that time, this country has been in many conflicts, it has been in many wars, and we have sent men and women all over the globe. And courageous and incredible men and women have put themselves in harm's way. They have even sacrificed their lives so we could enjoy the rights, the privileges, and the freedoms that we do on a daily basis. And so if that is you, and you have served in our armed forces in the past, or you are currently serving, we want to say thank you. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your sacrifice. And not only to you, but also thank you to your families as well, because we recognize that it impacts them as well. And Naya, who's over here, who's operating one of our cameras, her husband is actually stationed in North Carolina, and they have 2 little ones. And so because he's in North Carolina, they spend lots of time apart. But yet this is his sacrifice, and this is what for them as a family that they are doing, and the sacrifice for our country. And so if that is you and you are currently serving or have served in the past, we want to invite you to stand up so we can recognize you today and say thank you to you as well. And if you could actually remain standing, our ushers are going to come forward, and as a small token of our appreciation, we wanted to give you a voucher for Chubby's, or at Chubby's, for a free drink on us, which is just a small way for us as a community to say thank you for your service. And so, in addition, today we are in week 3 of our series, 5 Surprising Things God Loves. And 2 weeks ago, if you were here, when we kicked off the series, we talked about laughter. We talked about joy because God loves laughter. He loves joy because He's the author of it. He's the creator of it. And then last week, in light of the midterm elections, we talked about politics. And so today, as we continue on in the series, we're going to be talking about a principle that if we choose to embrace, because trust me, as I'm going to be talking about a little bit later on, it requires us to choose because this does not come naturally. But if we choose to live in this way, it will improve the quality of our lives. And right now, Jalen and the band, they're going to lead us in a song that tells us the extraordinary benefits that can enter into our lives when we choose to embrace and when we choose to live in this way and to live out this principle in our lives.
Lord, I don't want to rush on ahead in my own strength when you're right here. Lord, I don't want to rush on ahead in my own strength when you're right here. 'Cause I'm not in a hurry when it comes to your spirit, when it comes to your presence, when it comes to your voice. I'm learning to listen, just to rest in your nearness. I'm starting to notice you are speaking. Lord, I don't want to rush on ahead in my own strength when you're right here. Lord, I don't want to rush on ahead in my own strength when you're right here. 'Cause I'm not in a hurry when it comes to your spirit, when it comes to your presence, when it comes to your voice. I'm learning to listen, just to rest in your nearness. I'm starting to notice you are speaking.
Lord, I don't want to rush on ahead. I'm not in a hurry. When I heard those lyrics for the very first time earlier this week, I remember thinking to myself, that's not me. That's not my life. And probably for many of you here, that's not your life either. Because the reality is that for many of us, we are in a hurry, we are in a rush every day. For so many of us, every day we rush to work or school and then back home. We rush to the grocery store, to the gym. We rush to get our kids to wherever they need to go, to their activities, their lessons, all of their games. And we just are rushing around. And probably my guess is that for some of you here today, you rushed to church this morning as well. And I remember 8 months ago after our Saturday night service, I was in a huge rush to get home. I didn't have anything to get home for. There was no reason for me to rush, but I was in a rush. And because I ended up rear-ending a Hummer. And my car now looks like this. And it's been looking like that for 8 months because I was in a rush. And also, we're entering into one of the busiest times of the year, the Thanksgiving and Christmas season, where we're going to be tempted to be even in more of a hurry, even in more of a rush, to rush around to all the parties and the gatherings that we have to get to buy all the presents for our coworkers, friends, neighbors, our family members, our first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth cousin, for all of them, to buy all of those presents. And that's why what we're going to be talking about this morning, I believe, is so important and so applicable. Because this is a principle that if we choose to build into our lives, it will allow us to breathe, it will allow us to have margin, and it will allow us to experience greater freedom, joy, and peace in our lives. And back in 1982, in Southern California, there was a man by the name of Larry Walters. And what Larry did was that one day he decided to tie 42 helium balloons to his lawn chair. And his plan was, because he was in Southern California, his plan was to fly across the desert, east across the desert, all the way to the Rocky Mountains at about 30 feet up in the air. Secretly, because remember, this is church and you can't lie. How many of you have actually secretly wanted to do this as well? Just by show of hands. Okay, a lot of you have. I knew I wasn't the only one. So a lot of you have, and I've always wondered, I wonder what it would be like. And the reason why Larry wanted to do this was ever since he was a child, he wanted to fly. And so initially, he wanted to be a pilot in the Air Force, but because of poor eyesight, he wasn't able to do that. But rather than get his pilot's license, rather than to go up in a hot air balloon, Larry decided that he wanted to do this instead, to fly in a lawn chair. And so Larry knew that on this trip, he needed to bring some essential supplies. So two of the things that he brought with him were sandwiches as well as beer. Because when you're flying in a lawn chair, the last thing that you want to be is hungry and thirsty. But in addition to those two things, he also brought with him a pellet gun, because he knew that if he needed to come down, some of those balloons had to pop. And so he brought that pellet gun along with him, so whenever he wanted to start descending, he could start shooting those balloons out. And so Larry had all of this planned. He had the whole journey planned, the whole trip planned. But unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. Because Larry, how he initially anchored his lawn chair to the ground was with 2 ropes. And so Larry got into that chair, he strapped himself in, and after he strapped himself in, one of his friends cut the first rope. And immediately after that happened, the second rope snapped, and it launched him in the air at more than 1,000 feet a minute. So Larry is ascending very quickly in a lawn chair, and he didn't level off until 16,000 feet. Imagine being in a lawn chair at 16,000 feet. If you've ever been, I don't know, if you've ever been to the Sears Tower and you're all there, you look down and you're like, oh my goodness, it's a really long way down. That's not even close to where Larry was. Right? The only thing that's keeping him up there are a bunch of helium balloons and probably a little cheap little seatbelt. And the very first person to see Larry was a TWA pilot. And you can imagine this pilot, he probably did a double take when he sees a guy right beside him in a lawn chair with a bunch of balloons strapped to him. And so this guy radios the tower and says, hey, there's this guy up there. And so imagine being in Larry's position, sitting in that lawn chair, and you're probably scared out of your mind, wondering, how am I ever gonna get down? What am I gonna do? What if I fall? And so Larry, after a short period of time, he mustered all the courage that he had, and he took out that little pellet gun, and he started shooting out those balloons, and he started to slowly descend. And the crazy thing is that Larry ended up being okay. Other than getting wrapped up in some power lines at the end and immediately getting arrested, guy was completely okay. Totally fine. But as I was thinking about Larry's story, especially the ascent, when he was just going up and up and up, I was thinking probably for so many of us here, including myself, that's how often we feel in life. We feel like our lives are soaring out of control and there's nothing we can do to stop it. And the reality is that none of us want to live like this. We want to be able to breathe. We want to be able to have that margin in our lives. But it seems like our lives are so busy all the time. We have to keep going. And it could be work. It might be school. It might be our kids' activities, family things. It could be house projects because those never seem to end. It could be church. It always seems like there's somebody or someone or something that is demanding our time, our attention, and our energy. And it seems like we cannot stop because if we do, that list is just going to get longer and longer and longer. And eventually, we're just going to be underwater if you're not underwater already. But what we see in the scriptures and what God tells us is that, you know what? You don't have to live like this. We don't have to live like this because there is a different way, a better way that God has created and designed for us to live. And if we choose to embrace this principle, it will improve the quality of our lives. It will allow us to do those things that I mentioned. It will allow us to experience greater freedom, joy, and peace in our lives, and just to be able to take that breath. And what this principle is that it's called Sabbath. And 2 months ago in our Work Life series, we actually talked about Sabbath on one of those weekends, but we talked about the why. We talked about why we should rest, why we should observe Sabbath. And so if you missed that weekend, I want to invite you. You can go to our app, you can go to our website and check it out there. But this morning, we're not going to be talking about the why so much. We're going to be talking about the how. Because if you have ever tried to regularly rest, not just once in a blue moon, but regularly try to incorporate this into your life, you understand that it is really hard to do. Because naturally we think, rest? Why do you have to work hard to do that? You just sort of fall into it. But that's not the case, and you know this if you've tried to do this. And so today what we're gonna do is we're going to get really practical and we're gonna be talking about how to build this practice into our lives. And when we look at the scriptures, what we see is that this whole principle of Sabbath is something that is incredibly important to God. It's so important that he made it one of his 10 commandments. And if I was God, and I was thinking about this past week, if I was God and I had to pick the top 10 things that I wanted my people to know, that I wanted my people to do, honestly, rest probably wouldn't make that list. But it did for God, which tells us that it's incredibly important. And in the second book of the scriptures, which is the book of Exodus, this is what God told his people about Sabbath. He said, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. It's a powerful, powerful sentence, and we're gonna come back to that in a little bit. And then he continued on by saying, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, and on it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. Because in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he made it holy. And so what God is saying, one of the things that we see in this passage that we just read is that God says to his people, Sabbath is so important to me. I don't want just you to practice it. I want everyone around you to practice it as well. Everyone in your family, everyone who works for you, even your animals, they're supposed to rest too. And I love that sentence at the very beginning that we read, because God tells his people and he tells us, remember, do not forget the Sabbath day. And the reason why he says this to us is because he understood that our natural inclination as human beings would be to forget, to go all the time, to be working all the time. So he tells us, don't forget the Sabbath day. And then in the rest of that sentence, he tells us, this is how you can remember. This is how you can practice this life-giving principle in your life. And he says, by keeping it holy. And that word holy, it doesn't mean that on our Sabbath day that we have to do religious activities all day. That's not what holy means. But rather what holy means is to be set apart for God. Meaning that Sabbath day, what we're supposed to do, that Sabbath day is to look different. It's supposed to be different than the other 6 days. Because as we just read in the passage, God tells us, you know what, for 6 days I want you to do all your work. But this 7th day, it's set apart. So don't do any work, because that day is supposed to be different. But what I want you to do on that day is I want you to rest. I want you to set it apart for rest. But at the same time, what holy means is to be set apart for God. Not just for anything, but for God. And what that means is that we're to rest. But at the same time, what that rest looks like, rest isn't like this tiny little thing that, hey, you know what? This is what rest means. Rest is a larger principle than that. And so what God is saying when he's saying, set this day apart for him, set this day apart for rest, he's telling us, do whatever you need to do to be re-energized, to be refreshed, to be recharged, to be able to be filled up with life again, so that you can then move into your week. So that you can move into your week, not depleted, not exhausted, but energized. So you can serve and love not only me, but also the people around you. That's the Sabbath principle. And when it comes to rest is probably gonna look different for probably all of us here, probably for many of us here. And I was thinking about how my wife Robin and I rest, because she's an extrovert. So rest to her looks like spending time with people who she loves and appreciates, laughing, having conversation, doing all of that kind of stuff, because that's what fills up her tank. But for me, that's not rest, because I'm an introvert. And on my Sabbath, which tends to be Mondays, that's the last thing I want to do. I don't want to spend time with people, because typically I'm here with all of you amazing people for the entire weekend, and that's great, right? It's amazing, look forward to it, love having conversations, but because I'm an introvert, it's draining. And so, exactly, there's another introvert right there. You guys understand me, right? All of you extroverts are probably thinking I'm a terrible human being. It's not the case, not the case at all. And so it doesn't, on Mondays, on my Sabbath, it doesn't even matter what I'm doing. I just need that alone time to be able to process, to be able to think, to be able to reflect, just think back on what's happened, not only on the weekend, but in the past week. And it doesn't matter what I'm doing. I could be out mowing the lawn, I could be taking a walk, I could be watching a movie, reading, praying, doesn't even matter. But that alone time allows me to be refreshed. So then I could then head into my week to do what God is asking me to do. That's what Sabbath is. Do whatever you need to be refreshed, whatever it looks like for you, to be refreshed, to then enter into that week, to do what God is asking you to do, what he's calling you to do. But as I mentioned, if you've ever tried to observe this principle, if you've ever tried to regularly practice Sabbath, you understand that it is really, really hard to do it regularly. And an author by the name of Judith Shulevitz, she understood this as well when she wrote in a New York Times article these words, and she wrote this a number of years ago. This is what she said: "Most people mistakenly believe that all you have to do to stop working is not work. But the inventors of the Sabbath understood that it was a much more complicated undertaking, because you cannot downshift casually and easily the way you might slip into bed at the end of a long day. This is why the Puritan and Jewish Sabbaths were so exactingly intentional, requiring extensive advanced preparation. The rules did not exist to torture the faithful, but they were meant to communicate the insight that interrupting the ceaseless round of striving requires a surprisingly strenuous act of will, one that has to be bolstered by habit as well as by social sanction." And what Shulevitz is saying is that observing the Sabbath, actually practicing this, is really hard. And so if we want this to become a regular habit, a regular practice in our lives, and as I mentioned, it is life-giving when you do it. But if we want to do it, we have to work hard. We have to fight for it. We have to be intentional. We have to prepare for it. And that's probably a counterintuitive thought for many of us here. Because as I said earlier, many of us think, rest? Why do you got to prepare for that? You just sort of just fall into it. You sort of just enter into it. You don't have to prepare. But again, if you regularly try to do it, you know that it's really hard. And that's why the Jewish people, all throughout their history, they've had all these rules, these guidelines, these principles that have told them this is exactly what you can and cannot do on the Sabbath, because they understand that is extremely hard. So if you want to build this principle into this life-giving principle into your life, you got to fight for it, you got to work for it, you have to be intentional, and you have to be thoughtful. And so for the rest of our time this morning, what I wanted to do was I wanted to give you 3 thoughts as to how we can build this practice, not only into our day, but also our week and our year. And these 3 thoughts are from a pastor out in Southern California named Rick Warren. And all you have to do to remember these 3 thoughts all you have to do is remember 6 letters, and they are DDWWAA. So let's say it all together, audience participation. DDWWAA. That's it. And the DD, what that stands for is it stands for divert daily. And what that means is to take time every single day to connect with God. It could be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It could be less, it could be more. But carve out some time every day to connect with God, whatever that looks like for you. It could be reading the scriptures, it could be praying, it could be taking a walk, it could be listening to music. But however you connect with God, do that. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus told us this: I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing. And what Jesus was telling us here is that if you want to create something beautiful, if you want to create something lasting, if through your life that you want to radiate out into the world, hope, justice, compassion, joy, life, and love, if you want these things to not only fill up your life, but also spill out into the lives of the people around you, you have to be connected to me. Just like a branch is to a vine, you gotta stay connected, because I am the creator, I am the author, the originator of these things. And the reason why Jesus told us, you gotta remain in me, you gotta stay connected to me, is because he understood that every single day there are things that try to sever that connection between us and him, things that try to drag us away from him. And it could be fear, guilt, shame, sex, power, money, whatever it is. He understood that there would always be things in our lives that try to pull us away. So he says, be careful. I want you to have life. I want you to experience life to the fullest. And the only way that you're going to do that is if you remain in me. And when we divert daily, that is the choice we're making, to stay connected, just like a branch is to a vine. And this whole principle of diverting daily is something that I've personally struggled with for the last 7 years. Because I'm a pretty regimented, I'm a pretty disciplined person, and I love routine. And so before I had kids, which was 7+ years ago, every morning between 6:30 to 7 a.m., I would spend that time connecting with God. And I would read the scriptures typically and pray, and that's usually how I would do that. But after I had kids, that time just blew up. Said bye-bye to that. And if you have young children, or if you have had young children, you understand how crazy and hectic the mornings can be. And that's what ended up happening. And I realized that unless I want to get up at like 4:30 or 5 a.m. every single morning, it's probably not going to happen in the mornings for a number of years. And it hasn't. And it's been a really like a struggle for me, because I just haven't been able to carve this time out. And so I've tried at other periods during the day. I tried it at lunch, I tried it later on in the afternoon, tried it before I went to bed, but I could never, ever find a time that consistently worked for me. But 2 months ago, early on in September, a good friend of mine challenged me to build this practice into my life again. And so I found that every morning, because my kids started going to school again, my 2 oldest anyways, but I found that after I dropped them off at the bus stop to when I needed to go to work, I had this 15 to 20 minute window. And so for the past 2 months, every morning during those 15 to 20 minutes, I've been spending that time connecting or trying to connect with Jesus. And just as I've been doing this again for the past 2 months, let me tell you, it's been so incredibly life-giving, because it's during that time that God has shown me, he has taught me so much. He's shown me how much fear I have in my life, and the fact that a lot of times, a lot of my life is controlled by that fear. The decisions that I make, the things that I choose to do are often dictated by fear. And he's shown me, I want you to be free of this in your life. And these are the steps that I want you to take to realize that freedom. Oftentimes during those 15 to 20 minutes, God reminds me of what's important and that he realigns my values, and he also tells me, hey, this is what I want you to focus on today. Because the two questions that I often ask Jesus during that time is, what do you want me to know and what do you want me to do? And how he often answers that latter question is, I want you to love the people around you to the best of your ability. But at the same time, those 15 to 20 minutes also allow me to take a breath. After the craziness and the busyness of the morning, trying to get my kids up, making lunches, feeding them breakfast, trying to get them to their bus stop, it just allows me to take a breath before I have to enter into the rest of my day. And as I said earlier, it has been so incredibly life-giving. It centers me as I really have to move throughout the rest of my day. And it's benefited not only my family life, but it's also benefited my work life as well. But in addition to diverting daily benefiting us as individuals, organizations have come to understand the benefit of this as well. And there's a fantastic organization out there called International Justice Mission, or IJM. And their mission is to seek justice for the poor and the powerless in our world. And they rescue people from all around the world, from police brutality, from sex trafficking, from slavery, and from a whole host of other things. And they also work with local law enforcement to prosecute those involved. And what IJM understands, they've been doing it for a long time. They have offices all around the world. And what IJM understands is that the work of justice begins with prayer, which is why every single morning, wherever their employees are, wherever their people are, all throughout the world, every single morning, every single one of them, they start their day. For the first 30 minutes of their day, they don't start by answering emails or returning phone calls or going to meetings, but they spend their first 30 minutes in silence for prayer, for reflection, as well as for meditation. And that's what they do. And then at 11 a.m., everyone stops what they're doing and they come together to pray. And some people, when they look at that organization and what they do, they might say, what a waste of time. Think of all the productivity you're losing. Think of all the work that your people aren't doing because they're praying and they're meditating and they're reflecting. But that's not how Gary Hagen, who is the CEO and founder of IJM and who has been fighting against human trafficking for more than 2 decades, sees it. Because this is what he believes. And that Gary Hagen said that prayerless striving leads only to exhaustion. And he says, I have learned just how crucial it is to settle my soul in the presence of Jesus every morning. Even though it's tempting to hurry into our work, we as an organization intentionally still ourselves and connect with our Maker, the God who delights in restoring and encouraging his children. This organization goes into some of the darkest places in the world, and they rescue people from some of the most horrific situations. And so they understand, and he understands, that this is the basis of them doing their work. This is what gives them strength. This is what gives them energy. This is what gives them courage. It is diverting daily together as a community. But in addition to diverting daily, what we also have to do is that a way that we can build this practice of Sabbath into our weekly rhythm is by withdrawing weekly. And that's basically the Sabbath principle. It's taking one day a week, setting it apart for God to do whatever we need to do to recharge so that we can then enter into our week refreshed to do what God is asking us to do. And last Saturday, Danny Cox and I, after our Saturday night service, we were walking out to the parking lot to our cars, and we met one of the people in this community. And so we got into a conversation, and he asked us about the Sabbath. He had no idea that we were talking about Sabbath this weekend, but he asked us a question about, when are you supposed to observe the Sabbath? When are you supposed to practice this principle? Does it have to be Sunday? Does it have to be a certain day, or is it whenever you want to? And so he was asking, which I think is a fantastic question. And so we were having this conversation back and forth, and as I was thinking about it in that moment, I was reminded of the words of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus said that man was not made for Sabbath, and that us as human beings, we were not made for Sabbath, but rather Sabbath was made for us. And what Jesus is saying in that verse is that he's saying that this whole Sabbath principle, it wasn't meant to make our lives more difficult. It wasn't to restrict us. It wasn't to make our lives miserable, but rather it was to free us, to give us, it's a gift, he's saying. This is a gift that I am giving you so you can live your life to the fullest, so you can live in the way that I've created and designed for you to live. So Sabbath isn't this tiny little box that this is the way that we have to observe it. That's not what it is at all. And so Sabbath doesn't meaning when it comes to the day that we observe it, it doesn't have to be Sunday. It could be whatever day you want it to be, because it's not upholding a day, it's upholding a principle and living by that principle. And so if your Sabbath is Sunday, fantastic. That's not my Sabbath because I'm usually here working. But if your Sabbath is Friday, great. If it's Monday like it is for me, or Wednesday, phenomenal. But it's about regularly and consistently setting aside one day to be refreshed, to be re-energized, so that we can do what God is asking us to do. That is the principle of Sabbath. It's withdrawing weekly. And the extraordinary thing about Sabbath is that God hasn't just built this need for rest into our fabric, the fabric of humanity, but also into the fabric of creation. And a number of years ago, Dave Wilson, who's one of our founders, also the lead pastor over at our Orient campus, he was in a meeting. And another guy in this meeting said to Dave, "Did you know that they rest bowling pins?" And Dave was like, "No, they don't. You're lying to me. You're trying to like trick me." And that he didn't believe this guy. And so, but this guy just kept on persisting, and he said, no, I'm telling you the truth. And I guess they didn't have smartphones. I guess this was like pre-smartphone, so it was way back then. And so he couldn't just Google it. And so he really wanted to know. And so Dave went across Square Lake Road to that bowling alley that's across the street. And he went up to the owner and he said to the owner, "I heard a rumor that you guys rest bowling pins." And so the owner said to Dave, "Come with me." And he took him behind the lanes to this secret room where they had all of these shelves filled with bowling pins that were just resting. And what this guy said, what the owner said to Dave, was that he said, "We'll rest our bowling pins. We'll rest them for a week, we'll rest them for a month, maybe even 2 months. And when we put them back on the lanes, what we see is that they pop. They jump to life, because that time away from working and being a bowling pin, I realized that's a tough job. Getting constantly hit by a bowling ball all the time, that is the purpose why you were made, right? That's the purpose of a bowling pin. And so constantly getting hit, but that time away, being able to rest, what it allows the wood to do is it fills the wood up with energy. It refreshes the wood. It gives it new life. And so the people who go, if you're somebody who bowls a lot, in that, how I classify somebody who bowls a lot is you own a bowling ball and bowling shoes. And if that's you, you understand this principle. And so this is what this guy was telling Dave. And if that's the way that wood works, in that it needs to rest as well, what about us? How much more for us? Because life hits us hard every single day, for every single one of us here. And what rest allows us to do is it fills up our soul with life. And so if you're sitting here today, if you're watching today, and you're wondering, why am I so depleted all the time? Why am I so exhausted? Why do I always feel like I'm at the end of my rope? Let me ask you a question. When is the last time you rested? When's the last time you took a period of time every day to just simply connect with God, to breathe? 5 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is. When's the last time you diverted daily? And when is the last time, once a week, you set aside a particular day to rest? Because when we do, it fills us up with greater life so that we can then do what God is asking us to do in a greater way. And so diverting daily, withdrawing weekly. And the AA, before I actually get to that, I wanted to invite the ushers forward to receive our offering for today. And so if this is your first time here, please do not feel any obligation to give. We're just thrilled that you're here. Instead, what we'd love for you to do is after the service, we'd love for you to go out into the lobby, drop by the hub, and you'll see the people there. They have bright orange shirts on, and there are a bunch of TV screens around a pole. And we'd love to meet you, love to tell you a little bit more about our community, and also answer any questions that you have. And if you're somebody who gives, whether it's here or whether it's online, because I recognize that 80% of our people give online, that's where Robin and I give as well. And that's a great way to give. Safe, secure, quick. You can also give via text. But if that is you, we want to say thank you for catching the vision of what God's doing in our community and jumping on board in that way. But going back to these principles, DDWW, divert daily, withdraw weekly, and what the AA stands for is abandon annually, meaning every single year take an extended period of time to just unplug, to be able to get away. And that could be a vacation where you go somewhere else and you get a change of scenery. It could be a retreat. It could be a staycation, whatever it is for you, to really break away from the normal rhythms, the normal craziness, the hectic schedule that we have every single day, and to be able to change our perspective and to be able to just simply to do different things. And if you've ever done this, and probably every single one of us have taken vacations, and when you have young children, I recognize there are people with young children like me. It's not necessarily a vacation, it's more like a trip, right? And I recognize that. But even the change of scenery is great, right? But if you've done that, you recognize that even with that is that when you just simply unplug and you just do different things and you're in different rhythms, it just allows God to speak and allows God to do extraordinary and powerful things in our lives. And I've been at Kensington now for 10 months. And I remember for the first 7 months, I was working like crazy. Because, you know what, I'm the new guy. So I wanted to make a good impression. And so I put a lot more time and energy into things than I normally would. And I was also really working hard because I was trying to learn a new culture, a new system. I was trying to get to know my coworkers. I was trying to get to know as many of you amazing people as possible. So I was working a lot. And during those first 7 months, I remember Robin would say to me, she said to me over and over and over again, your family misses you. You're hardly around, and even when you are, you're not even present. And every single time she said that to me, I would tell her, could you please cut me some slack? Can you please be patient? I know it's been a crazy month, but things will get better. Things will slow down next month. And then I sometimes would say, I promise. Terrible words. I shouldn't have said those last 2 words, but that's what I would say to her. That's how I responded. But the thing is that you probably know this because maybe you said these words as well, is that they never did. They never changed. It just kept on going month after month after month. But this past August, I finally took 2 weeks off, and as a family, we drove out to Minnesota to visit Robin's parents. And they live on a lake, and I love their place because their place just forces you to slow down. And it's nearly impossible to do any work there. And trust me, I know this because I've tried. And so it just forces you to slow down, and that's what we did as a family. We slowed down enough to play together, to eat together, to watch movies together, to relax together, to go swimming together. We slowed down enough to be together. And during those 2 weeks, I came to remember again and came to realize again how much fun my kids are. And that trip was truly life-changing to me because I had this huge paradigm shift on that trip. Because if I'm gonna be honest with you, before that trip, if you asked me what my top priorities were, I probably would have told you, you know what my number 1 priority is? It's God, followed by family, and then followed by work. But that would have been a total lie. Because the number 1 priority in my life before August was work. Work was number 1 by far, followed way behind by God and family. And because work was my number 1 priority, anything that prevented me from doing it, I saw as an obstacle, I saw as an impediment, I would even tell you I saw as a nuisance. And on certain nights, that's how I would often see my children. And that I would look at them and I would think in my mind, can you please go to sleep early because I want to get back to work. But when I went on this trip, I was able to slow down enough. And I was reminded of how much fun they are. I was reminded of how much I deeply love them and the fact that as a parent, you know what, I only get 1 shot at this. And I was reminded again that, you know what, being a parent to my children is not something that I have to do, but rather it's something that I get to do. And when I was driving back from Minnesota, I remember just sitting there, just looking at the wide open road. I remember thinking to myself and saying to God, God, when I get back to the normal rhythm of my life and I have to go back to work and I have to do all of these things again, I don't want to go back to this. I don't want to go back to the way things were before this vacation. I don't want to be that person anymore, because that person is a miserable person. Nobody wants to be around that person. I don't even want to be around that person, because that person is cranky, that person is impatient, that person is not loving, that person is not gracious, and I do not want to be that person. And what I came to realize is that if I don't want to go back to that place, I have to build rest into my life, because for so long, I was moving at a place that was just unsustainable, where I had very little margin in my life, which is why I was so cranky, which is why I was so miserable and impatient and unloving so much of the time. And I came to realize, if that is not who I want to be, I have to do exactly what we're talking about this morning. I have to be able to divert daily. I have to be able to withdraw weekly. I have to be able to abandon annually. Because when I do, one of the extraordinary things, as I've been doing this, consistently been trying to do this for the past 2 months, what I've come to realize is that when I do this consistently, what God does is that he reminds me of what's truly important. Because I tend to be a pretty hard worker, and that's one of the things that my mom, who's a single immigrant parent, passed down to me, to work hard. But oftentimes when I'm working, I have these blinders on, and that's all I can see is work. And I feel like I get my head stuck in the sand. But when I do the things that we've been talking about this morning, God takes these blinders off, and he pulls my head out of the sand, and he tells me, look around, because you know what? Work is not the most important thing in your life. Look at the amazing people that I've given you. Look at these kids, look at your wife, and most importantly, look at me. Because these are way more important than work. And that's what this allows me to do. And so if you're here this morning, or if you're watching via stream, and you feel exhausted, you feel so tired, and when you look at your life, you feel like, you know what, I'm just cranky, I feel like I'm miserable all the time, nobody wants to be around me, whether it's at home or at work or wherever it is. Let me ask you, when is the last time you rested? When is the last time you did these things in your life? And Jesus tells us these extraordinary words in the Gospel of Matthew, and that he invites us, is that he tells us that if you are weary and burdened, he says, come to me. And my guess is that is the case for many of you here today, is that you are weary and burdened. And Jesus' promise is that if this is how you're feeling and you come to me, I will give you rest. Because in me, and the extraordinary thing about this verse is that Jesus says, I'm not going to point you in the direction where you can find rest, but if you come to me, you'll find rest, because I am rest. In me, when you're connected to me, when you remain in me, it's there you find rest. And so in a moment, Jalen and our band, they're going to lead us in a song, Give Me Jesus. And if that is how you're feeling, if you are weary and burdened, my hope for you is that would be your prayer, that you would say, Jesus, I need more of you in my life, understanding that you are the only one who can give me rest. But we're going to take a few moments right now before we get to that song. And I want to invite you just to reflect, to think about what was said today. The divert daily, withdraw weekly, abandon annually. And if you are exhausted, what is one of these things, whether it's diverting daily, WWAA, whichever it is, what is one of these principles that you can implement in your life this week? I want to invite you to think about that, reflect on that in the next few moments before we get to this song.
In the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, give me Jesus. When I am alone, oh, when I am alone, oh, when I am alone, give me Jesus, give me Jesus, give me Jesus. You can have all this world. Give me Jesus. Let my heart want for nothing but you, just you. Let my heart want for nothing but you, just you. The riches of this world will never satisfy. Let my heart want for only you. Oh, let my heart want for nothing but you, just you. Let my heart want for nothing but you, just you. The riches of this world will never satisfy. Let my heart want for only you. For me, only Jesus. For me, only Jesus. For me, only Jesus. For me, only Jesus. We're gonna sing the tag of one more song. I'm gonna invite you all to stand. We simply sing, so set a fire down in our souls that we can't contain, that we can't control. How many of us want more of God? So sing us out. So set a fire down in my soul that I can't contain, that I can't control. I want more of you, God. I want more of you, God. So set a fire down in my soul that I can't contain, that I can't control. I want more of you, God. control. I want more. Sing, I want more. I want more. So set a fire down in my soul that I can't contain, that I can't control. I want more. We want more.
So God, that is our prayer this morning, that we desire to have more of you, understanding that it's only in you that we can find true rest for our souls. And show us how we can do that this week. Which of these 3 principles that we can implement in our lives in a greater way. And so we thank you, God, that that's what you desire for us, rest. And through rest, it brings freedom and joy and all these extraordinary things, Lord. And we're able to live the lives that you created us to live. And so we thank you. And we pray these things in your Son's name. Amen. And so on the way out, you guys will receive one of these, and it just talks about some of the amazing things that God has been doing since 2010, so we want to invite you to look it over. Also, this coming Wednesday is midweek. Dan Sadler, great friend of Kensington, is going to be here, so we want to invite you back at 7 o'clock, and our prayer team is going to be out front, and so if anyone would like to receive prayer, we want to invite you to come forward. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great Sunday.